The blood moon. The town of Eldridge had always been a peaceful place, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. Its charm lay in its simplicity. Families gathered for picnics, children played freely in the streets, and neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. But this year, something was different. An omen hung over the town, the impending arrival of the blood moon. Rumors swirled among the townsfolk about the effects of the blood moon. It was said that when the moon turned a deep crimson, it awakened something primal within people, igniting their basest instincts and inciting violence. Eldridge had experienced its share of folklore, but this was a tale that left even the most skeptical of residents uneasy. The town's mayor, Claire Henderson, held an emergency meeting in the community center. She stood before a gathering of concerned citizens, her expression grave. "I know many of you are worried about the blood moon," she said, glancing around the room. "But I assure you, there's no reason to fear. It's just a natural phenomenon. We should come together as a community and enjoy the evening." Despite her assurances, tension hung in the air. The townsfolk exchanged wary glances, and whispers of caution echoed around the room. As the day of the blood moon approached, fear seeped into the very fabric of Eldridge, and the town became eerily quiet. On the night of the blood moon, Jessica, a local high school teacher, found herself staring out her window, mesmerized by the sight of the moon hanging low in the sky, casting an eerie red glow over the landscape. It was beautiful, yet it filled her with dread. She had heard the stories, the warnings passed down through generations, and she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. "Just a myth," she muttered to herself, attempting to dispel her fears. She turned away from the window, but her instincts urged her to stay vigilant. As the hours passed, the atmosphere shifted. A palpable tension hung in the air, a subtle electricity that made her skin prickle. Jessica decided to take a walk, hoping that fresh air would calm her nerves. She slipped on her coat and stepped outside, the cool breeze wrapping around her like a shroud. The streets were deserted, the usual sounds of laughter and chatter replaced by an unsettling silence. As she wandered through the neighborhood, Jessica noticed flickering lights in a nearby house. Curiosity piqued. She approached the residence and peered through the window. Inside, she saw her neighbor, Mr. Johnson, a mild-mannered man in his 60s, pacing frantically. His face was twisted in agitation, and he muttered to himself, his hands trembling. Suddenly, he grabbed a kitchen knife and slammed it against the table, the sound reverberating in the stillness. Jessica's heart raced. Something was terribly wrong. "Mr. Johnson," she called, her voice shaky. He whipped around, eyes wild and unrecognizable. "Stay away," he shouted, brandishing the knife. "They're coming for me." Jessica stumbled back, fear coursing through her veins. She turned and ran. The image of her neighbor's frenzied face burned into her memory. She needed to find safety, to escape whatever darkness had taken hold of Eldridge. As she raced through the streets, Jessica encountered more people acting strangely. A woman screamed at shadows, her hair disheveled and eyes wide with terror. A group of men stood in the middle of the road, shouting incoherently at one another, their fists clenched. Panic gripped her as she realized the stories were true. The blood moon was unleashing something horrific in the hearts of her neighbors. She sprinted towards the town square, hoping to find others who could help. As she neared the center, She heard the unmistakable sounds of chaos, shouting, breaking glass, and the unmistakable cries of fear. The once peaceful town was descending into madness. Jessica pushed through the crowd that had gathered, trying to make sense of the chaos. People were fighting, some with each other, others with unseen foes. The blood moon hung high above, illuminating the scene like a grotesque theater of horror. "Claire, where are you?" she shouted, searching for the mayor among the tumult. But as she scanned the crowd, she saw Claire standing on a platform, her face pale and eyes wide. The mayor had a microphone in hand, desperately trying to restore order. "Please, everyone, we need to calm down. This is madness," Claire cried, her voice breaking under the strain. But her words fell on deaf ears. A man, driven mad by the blood moon's influence, surged forward and tackled Claire to the ground. Jessica gasped, feeling a surge of adrenaline as she pushed through the throng of people to reach her. Just as she reached Claire, a woman swung a heavy object, narrowly missing Jessica's head. She dodged, heart pounding, as chaos erupted around her. The blood moon bathed the scene in its red glow, and the townsfolk fought like animals, primal instincts taking over as fear turned into violence. "Get away from her!" Jessica shouted, pulling Claire to her feet. Together, they stumbled back, seeking refuge behind a nearby fountain. "We need to get out of here," Claire gasped, her face a mask of terror. "We have to find a way to stop this." As they turned to flee, a piercing scream rang out. Jessica looked back to see a group of people surrounding a man on the ground, their faces twisted in rage. They kicked and hit him mercilessly, their eyes filled with a manic light. It was as if the blood moon had stripped away their humanity, leaving only raw, violent impulses. "We can't stay here," Claire urged, grabbing Jessica's arm. "We need to find safety. We have to warn the others." With that, they darted into the nearby alleyways, desperate to escape the frenzy that had overtaken Eldridge. As they ran, they could hear the echoes of violence, shouts, screams, and the sounds of destruction. Hours passed, and Jessica and Claire found temporary refuge in an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. They barricaded the door, panting and shaken. The moon loomed ominously outside, its blood-red hue casting an eerie glow through the broken windows. "What do we do?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "How do we stop this?" Claire sank to the floor, her face buried in her hands. "I don't know," she admitted, the weight of fear pressing down on her. "We can't let the blood moon dictate our actions. We need to find a way to break its hold." Jessica's mind raced as she remembered the stories she had heard about the blood moon. It was said that the only way to break its curse was to confront the darkness within oneself. "We need to face our fears," she said, her voice steadying. "If we confront what we're afraid of, maybe we can break the cycle." Claire looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "You're right. We can't let it control us. But how do we do that?" Jessica thought for a moment, then said, "Let's focus on what frightens us the most. We can't allow the chaos to consume us. We need to remember who we are." As they closed their eyes, Jessica imagined her fear, the loneliness of losing her loved ones, the uncertainty of the future, the haunting feeling of being trapped in a world spiraling into chaos. She held on to those emotions, confronting them head-on. Claire did the same, focusing on her fears of failure, of letting her town down in their time of need. Together, they faced the darkness that threatened to overwhelm them, embracing the vulnerability that came with it. As they battled their inner demons, the sounds of chaos outside began to fade. The violent shouts and screams grew distant, and for the first time since the blood moon had risen, Jessica felt a sense of calm wash over her. With a deep breath, she opened her eyes. The room was still bathed in the eerie red light, but the air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She looked at Claire, who was smiling faintly. "I think it's working," Claire said softly. "We're breaking its hold." But just as hope began to blossom, a loud crash echoed from the front door. Panic surged through them as they exchanged worried glances. They had to defend themselves. The blood moon still hung high in the sky, and their neighbors were still driven to madness. The door splintered as it swung open, revealing a figure standing silhouetted against the crimson glow. It was Mr. Johnson, his eyes wild and manic, blood splattered across his shirt. "You can't hide," he bellowed, charging toward them. "Stay back," Jessica shouted, her heart racing. She grabbed a nearby lamp, ready to defend herself. But Claire stepped forward, holding up her hands. "Mr. Johnson, you need to fight it. Remember who you are." He hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. I don't want to hurt anyone," he cried, falling to his knees. "Focus on what frightens you," Jessica urged, emboldened by their earlier experience. "Face it, and you can break free." The man's expression twisted as he battled the darkness within. "I'm afraid of losing my family," he screamed, clutching his head in agony. "I'm terrified of being alone." As he wrestled with his fear, Jessica and Claire joined him, speaking words of encouragement. "You're not alone. We're here with you," Claire cried, reaching out to him. In that moment, the energy in the room shifted. The crimson glow began to flicker, and the oppressive weight of fear lightened. Mr. Johnson's expression softened, and he looked up, the wildness in his eyes fading. I see them," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I see my family." With a final, agonized scream, he rose to his feet, standing tall against the overwhelming darkness. The shadows that had plagued him for so long dissolved into the air, and the blood moon's grip weakened. With newfound resolve, Jessica and Claire joined him, creating a small circle of support. They spoke aloud their fears, sharing their burdens with one another. As they did, atmosphere shifted. The crimson hue that had once dominated the room faded, replaced by a soft, warm light. Outside, the sounds of chaos grew quieter, the violence of the blood moon losing its hold on the town. The moon began to dim, slowly transforming from blood red to a pale, silvery hue. The oppressive darkness lifted, revealing the beautiful night sky. "We did it!" Claire exclaimed, joy flooding her heart. As they emerged from the abandoned house, the three of them stood in awe of the transformation around them. The townsfolk, previously consumed by madness, began to shake off the influence of the blood moon, looking around in confusion. Jessica watched as neighbors embraced one another, relief washing over their faces. The horror of the night had subsided, replaced by the warmth of community and support. "I think we saved them," Jessica said, smiling at Claire and Mr. Johnson. But just as they began to celebrate their victory, a faint echo lingered in the air. A shadow flickered at the edge of their vision. a reminder that darkness could return. Jessica shivered, feeling a chill creep up her spine. The night passed, and dawn broke over Eldridge, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The blood moon had vanished, leaving the town in a quiet reverie. As people emerged from their homes, they shared stories of the chaos, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and gratitude. Jessica and Claire stood in the town square, surrounded by the remnants of the night's horror. It felt surreal, as if they had awakened from a nightmare, and yet the memories lingered. They had confronted the darkness, and in doing so, they had saved their town. But as they shared laughter and relief, a low, ominous rumble echoed in the distance. Jessica turned, her heart sinking as she realized the shadows were beginning to stretch once more. The air grew thick with unease, and she exchanged a worried glance with Claire. "Do you think it's really over?" Jessica asked, a knot tightening in her stomach. Claire bit her lip, uncertainty clouding her features. "I don't know. We need to stay vigilant. The darkness may return." As the townsfolk began to scatter, resuming their daily lives, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that the blood moon was just a prelude to something far more sinister. The experience had changed her. She had faced her fears, confronted the darkness, but she also realized that the shadows were never truly gone. And deep within her heart, she knew that the blood moon might rise again. In the months that followed, Eldridge tried to return to normalcy, but the shadows of that fateful night lingered in the minds of its residents. The tales of the blood moon became part of the town's folklore, a reminder of the thin line between light and darkness. As for Jessica, she became an advocate for mental health in the community, encouraging conversations about fear and vulnerability. She organized gatherings, bringing the townsfolk together to share their stories and support one another. But every now and then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, Jessica would find herself glancing at the sky. The moon, full and bright, would rise, and she couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine. One night, as she sat on her porch, a faint breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of unease. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. She looked up, and the moon hung high, a glowing orb in the night sky. And as she watched, a shadow flitted across its surface, fleeting but unmistakable. A reminder that darkness was always lurking, waiting for the right moment to emerge. With a deep breath, Jessica stood, a newfound determination in her heart. The blood moon might rise again, but she would be ready. Together with her community, she would confront whatever darkness lay ahead, knowing that the power of light and connection could always shine through. After all, it was in the face of fear that true strength was forged. And so, as the moon rose high, casting its silvery glow over Eldridge, Jessica whispered a silent promise to herself. She would never forget the lessons learned under the blood moon, and she would ensure that the light within her and her community would never be extinguished. But in the stillness of the night, shadows continued to whisper secrets of the past, reminding everyone that the blood moon's legacy lingered just beyond the horizon, waiting for the next cycle to begin.